Welcome to Pirate Politics. I'm Jeronimo Cortina, political science professor at the University of Houston.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus, a political science professor, also here at the University of Houston. Thanks for hanging out with us and talking a little bit of politics on party politics. This week, though, it's sort of the gladiator edition of party politics, right? You will be entertained. It's a lot of Republican on Republican violence this week, I think. Definitely at the presidential level, certainly here in Texas. We've seen this a lot before, but this is going to be ramped up in a way I think that we haven't seen before for quite a while. So let's dig into it. The kind of most impressive news of the week was that the CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee, which is a long-term political action committee that appeals to conservatives, sometimes very conservatives, hosted a meeting last week, and several notables came, including Donald Trump, Nikki Haley. Some people skipped, though, like Ron DeSantis. So we can talk about that. But the big news was that Donald Trump basically frames the 2024 election as an existential, very dark thing. He says that this is the final battle, which strikes me as very kind of Battlestar Galactica in a way that is not appealing. He says that he's the only one who can save the planet from World War III. He says that basically that communists, globalists, and the deep state are coming to get you, so beware, you specifically, and all of us generally. And then that basically he is your retribution. So if you want to get back at this, you have to vote for Donald Trump. It's a pretty kind of dark theme, right, that he echoed, right, in his inaugural address and now is kind of returning to, that grievance politics. Will it work? What do you think?
Well, nothing new, right? I mean, there was nothing new on Trump's speech. Nothing like, he was talking to a MAGA almost packed room, right? Because it was not entirely full, packed the ballroom. So I mean, I'm not very convinced that he has an extra punch. Like, I thought when I watched the speech that he was trying to look for something, right? Something here that would propel him. I mean, you just mentioned the most, I guess, important phrase during his speech, but everything else was the same. Exactly the same that we have heard in the past 5 years.
Yeah, so that's actually interesting. So, I mean, two things important in what you said. Number one is that it was pretty empty, right? Even for Nikki Haley's speech, it was pretty empty. So he was making fun of her for that, but like his wasn't that much better. But also that he seems to be kind of extemporaneously attempting to try to find some rhythm or some kind of a theme that's going to work for him. But it doesn't seem to be getting that much better, in part because he's not a very sharp campaigner. Like, he's not very disciplined in that. So here's a great example of that, actually. Here's a direct quote. He says, "I stand here today, and I'm the only candidate who can make you this promise. I will prevent, and very easily, World War III." Wild applause, according to Politico. And then it says, "And you're going to have World War III, by the way." And then it says confused applause. So are we happening it or not? Are you going to stop it or not? It's confusing. And I mean, obviously, the end result of it, regardless of all of the kind of specific details, are that he wants to be able to capture that kind of grievance-filled politics and make the conservative party, make the Republican Party, basically the MAGA party, right? And there are real risks to that.
And that was what CPAC was, right? It was a MAGA event. I mean, Nikki Haley went, and this new candidate that suddenly appeared on TV, but that was it, right? Everything was CPAC. It was also a time for Trump's sons, Don Jr., to advertise cell phone company.
That's good,
And I think he was
Trump wine. Is that still like a thing we can drink? Or?
The other advertisement of precious metals or rocks or something like that.
Right.
So it was.
It's like a big infomercial for Donald Trump, right?
And I didn't understand, but it's it's how, I guess, the monetization, right, of political ideas, and at the end is, if this thing is selling, let it roll. Right?
This group will buy, right? I mean, these people, they go home, they drink Trump wine, they're looking forward to their Trump steak, right? And then they log on to Trump University and but that's not necessarily going to be a broader appeal. I think one thing he did do to try to make that broader appeal is to try to put some distance between him and Ron DeSantis. So during the address, he basically chose to poke DeSantis a little bit, and Republicans who have tried to suggest maybe we should trim some of these entitlement programs like Social Security or Medicaid. Very unpopular. We talked about this weeks ago when we talked about the president's speech. But basically, he says that some people in the party have been attempting to try to whittle it down or destroy Social Security, and he says he won't. So that's one avenue perhaps where he can use to kind of press against DeSantis and some other Republicans. But it's a pretty thin broth, I think, in terms of trying to move him to the next level. That said, people still like him. So the straw poll, came out right immediately after sort of the attendees had seen the universe of potential options. Trump wins with 62% of the vote, a 42-point romp over Ron DeSantis. So obviously that's a pretty clear indication that this wing of the party still embraces Trump. And it's this wing of the party that does the voting. They do the giving, small dollar. They do the block walking, right? They're knocking on doors in cold New Hampshire.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you have DeSantis, right? Yeah. And DeSantis went to, he was at the Reagan Library, right, at the same time. And also he attended the Club for Growth, right? Yeah. That's where the big checks are.
That's where the big money is.
Yeah. That's where, the traditional or not the non-MAGA Republicans are, right? Yeah. I'm not saying that the other folks don't write big checks, but here we're talking about like huge checks.
Institutional support in a way that like you don't have at CPAC, where it's like more grassroots. But I don't know, if you had to pick, which would you pick? Running for a president in today's day and age, if you're a Republican, which side would you rather be on? Which team of Avengers in the Civil War do you want rushing to your aid?
Well, the problem is that the Trump brand is not selling anymore.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, we just saw it, 2022, I think, November. Is not selling. People are not buying that, right?
That's good.
So I don't know if the rebranding of the rebrand of the rebrand with theme broth, right?
It's not working. But how are Trump ties selling? They're still selling well? Like, I'm going to get you one. That's going to be your birthday present.
Thank you.
Like, get ready.
Thank
but
you
here's actually another interesting question. So obviously, there's an ecosystem here, right? We've got Republicans who are,
Is that going to be your word of the week?
Ecosystem. Okay, political ecosystem.
Okay.
And so basically they have to figure out, how they're going to get a nominee, and then they're going to have to get a vice president. So one question is, who is going to be the vice president? So typically, that's been the sort of logic that you kind of balance the ticket, or you try to find somebody who's going to be a kind of complement to you. In this case, actually, a survey was done there of some of the figures asking who they thought should be the vice president. And so it's natural to see like other competitors potentially, but they weren't anywhere near the top of the poll. Nikki Haley, who we'll talk about in a second, Ron DeSantis, who we'll talk about in a second, didn't make the field, but Carrie Lake did, who's a failed gubernatorial candidate in Arizona. She's the one who got the most votes. So Trump's going to want somebody who's like him, who's loyal. That's probably not like most of what the rest of the field will look like, especially since they're literally running against him. So that's going to be another kind of problem to figure out too. Like if Trump does win, who does he pick? You mentioned the person who you didn't know. I think it's Perry Johnson, who's a Michigan businessman. He got 5% of the vote. So that's not bad, I guess. For not being known very much, it's not bad. So that's interesting to note. But Nikki Haley, as you said, actually kind of raised some eyebrows this week at Club for Growth, talking about her challenge and the way she has framed her nomination, her candidacy, has been to say that the party's spending too much money, or they're allowing too much money to be spent. She says Republicans are to blame, Democrats are to blame, and basically says that this is something that has to be fixed for the future. So my question to you is this a good strategy for her, right? I mean, Trump goes for the kind of grievance-filled, World War III is coming. I'm the only one who can save you.
I'm not.
At
the same time.
But maybe not. So confusing. But he goes for that grievance sort of politics. But she goes for the kind of traditional Republican, low spending, kind of low taxes, right? Return to that theme of Republican Party politics. Is it going to work? Is it going to give her enough of the vote to be able to be competitive in some of these states?
Well, the way that I see it is, society has changed so much, right? Obviously, within the Republican Party, you have a good section or a fraction or a faction within the Republican
faction,
Party.
There you go.
The
mischief
is,
of them.
Right,
yeah.
that is, towards all these cultural and social issues and red meat and everything like that, right? It's a cornerstone of the cultural wars.
Yeah.
That segment of population is kind of going down given the demographics, right? On the other hand, you have, the rest of the population, 70-80% of the population that have been brought up in a world that is more acceptable of people's differences, that issues of race, ethnicity are like, not that they're not important, but, they're used to be in a society that is more plural of ideas, plural in terms of ethnicity, plural in terms of sexual orientation, et cetera, et cetera. So for them, if you're trying to sell that product, for them, it's like, I don't want to buy it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm 100% uninterested. It's like when, they say, well, we have eggplant today. It's like, I pass.
No,
I don't care. Well, we put cheese and I don't care. I don't want
it's
it.
It's the edge of it.
I don't want anything that has to do with eggplant. Oh, it's an eggplant parmesan. I don't care.
No, thank you.
Bye. Right? So these voters are not doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that has to put attention, or at least like a small alarm to the Republican Party. Is like, hey, you want to be competitive, you cannot go this route. I mean, this route might get you in the next 1 or 2 elections, but that's it. But Republicans have been losing, as President Trump says, bigly, right?
Bigly.
In many elections.
Yeah. And actually on that very point, she makes the appeal to Republicans who are tired of losing. She uses this exact language because of that reason, that they haven't been doing that well. And she didn't point any fingers to say Donald Trump's the reason we're losing, but implicitly that's what she's saying, is that type of politics isn't getting them any closer. So she's hoping that candor gets her into, I think, a lot of, kind of areas where she's going to be successful. But I think that the spending issue is like the Trojan horse for Republicans. Like, you send that in, she sends that in, and to say like, oh, I'm a low spending kind of a candidate, and then all of a sudden there's lots of other issues, because that's not the only thing she's going to talk about, right? But this was the most prominent thing in a room full of very prominent donors, potential donors. So I think that's useful for her to do. But obviously she's not going to be alone. She's going to have possibly Tim Scott, her fellow South Carolinian, running. But one person has said this week that they are not running, and that's Larry Hogan, who's the former governor of Maryland, by many accounts seen as a kind of moderate, similar to Haley, at least her talk at Club for Growth, is that he's kind of a, low spending, kind of low taxes, keep regulations low sort of a politician, not much on the kind of social issues. He says he doesn't want to be in a pileup of a bunch of people fighting. But really, this is probably the Republicans' last hope for there to be a real moderate choice here. And so in that way, it's became national news for a couple of days, right? Yeah. Somebody not running for president who most people didn't know is not normally news. But I think, those of us who watch this and see how the field is going to unfold, see that him not joining is pretty impactful. So what do you think?
Well, I mean, the way that he outlined it is interesting, right? Because he has, a bunch of people running, right? It's going to be Trump, DeSantis, well, potentially, right? Haley, this and that, et cetera, et cetera.
Probably Scott,
So I guess what he doesn't want to do, as you say, is give more likelihood to Trump for him to win.
That's a good point,
So therefore he says, no, I'm not going to be there because I don't want, he doesn't want to, divide the vote in such a way that, if you vote for him, then you're not going to vote for these. It's like the Condorcet theorem, right there.
Oh, wow. That's deep, right? Condorcet. I think you're right that, he recognizes, as many do, and I think you make a great point, that that's how Trump won, right? The party's divided, and there's a wing of the party, like we said, that will always be forever Trump, and so that's going to be a strategy that gets Trump the nomination. So more people running, taking off little pieces, could be a problem. So that's really interesting. So we'll see how that plays out. But obviously the presidential race is not just one-sided. You've got a different party too, the Democratic Party. Marianne Williamson says that she's going to challenge Joe Biden. We hesitated to include this because obviously she is a very long shot bid. She dropped out of the 2020 race because she kind of struggled to push back on the perception that she was the crystal woo-woo lady. Those are her words, not mine. Right. She was a one-time spiritual advisor to Oprah Winfrey, but has a following, right? There's a kind of wing of the party that really likes her. So what do you think about this? I mean, are we is Biden all worried about a challenge here?
Well, I mean, Biden should be worried because current polls, a Washington Post, ABC poll, a couple of months, last month, revealed that 58% of Democratic voters said they would prefer a candidate other than Biden for the 2024.
So it's not her, it's him.
It's him, right?
That's a problem. Okay.
So the question is if Marianne Williamson, a fellow Houstonian,
by
the way.
That's right, yeah.
Can pull it out. I mean, it's unlikely. Last time she was underwater when you put the the net poll results. She owed pollsters 4 points. She was -4.
I like how you think of that. You think like a pollster. Like, so you owe me for putting you in this poll.
Right. So I think might not be, but might be the catalyst for other potential candidates to say, well, we have 58.
Yeah.
Let's give it a try and see what happens.
That's a good point. Yeah, see, because, exactly. Interesting. Well, the other kind of side of things are back home here in Texas. Ron DeSantis didn't go to CPAC, but he did come to Texas. So he made a pitch at the Harris County Lincoln Reagan Dinner fundraiser and effectively talked about a lot of things. He says that he's pushed back in Florida against or against left-wing woke elite takeover of politics, education, COVID-19. He invoked the Battle of the Alamo, saying that this is a battle that we have to fight, and that instead of having the sort of woke foot soldiers, that they should fight them with American values. So I like it when people invoke the Alamo, forgetting that the Alamo was a disaster strategically. Although it did provide a kind of spark in a way that you could argue is what the spirit of this is, but it's bizarre in all kinds of ways. But what do you make, number one, of him not going to CPAC to talk about those things? And number two, him coming to Texas on Greg Abbott's territory?
Yeah, on the first one, I think he knows that CPAC this year was Trump's event, right? And it's
Trump PAC,
Trump PAC, and says I'm not going to waste my time, right?
Yeah.
And also, I guess, potentially to avoid any confrontation or being humiliated, by Trump and the crowd.
Going to give you a nickname, right? Like Ron DeSanctimonious,
exactly.
which is a little clunky, but maybe it'll still.
So, no. Right, I pass. But then coming here in Texas, right? It's in terms of public policy, Florida and Texas, or Governor DeSantis and Governor Abbott have been close to close. I mean, head to head, right?
Yes.
Who can become, who can be at the right of the other candidate, right?
Okay.
So if it's COVID-19, it's like we're not going to do that. Well, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Plus, we're not going to do that and that and that.
Right.
And it's the same thing in terms of the policies like, abortion, gun access, migrants to blue cities, diversity issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's, I feel, that competition, right, between them. So having here coming DeSantis that perhaps is, even though Abbott is also very conservative, similarly, when you put it on paper, right, DeSantis is more vocal, right? And DeSantis goes, like Disney World is woke.
Exactly. We'll control their content, right?
Manatees are woke, and he goes full throttle, right?
Mickey Mouse is going to have to put a shirt on,
exactly, something like that.
And
even though they arrive at the same thing, I think Governor Abbott is more, I would say, cautious in how he uses his words. But again, the question is, what do I guess once again the Trump MAGA movement wants, right? Because the Trump MAGA movement wants Trumpism without Trump. So who's going to be able to fill that gap?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I think that DeSantis can fill that gap pretty nicely. To do it on core turf is pretty tough. Trump still has pretty positive approval ratings here in Texas, and it's going to take something pretty dramatic to unseat that. And I think he recognizes that. But look, if he can take some of the money and be competitive, then that's a long-term play. And so it's probably pretty smart for him to kind of, strategically do this. The question is Trump smart enough to figure all this out and maneuver around it without just sort of resulting to kind of calling him nicknames and, being kind of petty on Twitter? I don't know. We'll see. I'm guessing no.
No.
And you just say no because
Truth Social.
Sure, of course, Truth Social, where people get their news. I think that's right. Well, obviously the Civil War wasn't just about the presidential level. There's more, and down ballot in District 23, which runs mostly along the Texas Texas border. Tony Gonzales is a Republican representative and kind of a star for them, actually. Like when he won, it was like a pretty big deal. He's held that district in a way that shows that like Democrats haven't been able to find an answer, to the kind of politics there. So he's been a kind of a rising star, but it turns out that the Texas GOP is not that happy with him on a couple of things. So on a vote of 57-5 with one abstention, the Texas GOP has decided to censor Tony Gonzales, basically over his votes to protect same-sex marriage and strengthen existing gun laws. This was an interesting vote because it kind of rolled off his back, right? So he tweets out, "No mames, RPT, puro pedo," right? Basically, like, I can't believe it. And well, how would you? I'll translate it in what I think, but you need to tell me the real translation, which is like, I can't believe it. Like, this is just talk, right? Like, again, it's just talk from the GOP. And I think it makes full sense because, like, he's been a real kind of vanguard on gun issues, right? Because he represents Uvalde. He's been somebody who can shown he can win in a conservative rural district that also has some pretty big urban elements. So what do you make of this? And please check my interpretation of his tweet, which is actually, I think, actually perfectly played.
No, I think, eventually, the tweet is very telling, right? Because I think, your translation is
adequate.
Okay. Yeah, it's all right.
Okay.
Whatever.
That's good. It'll do.
Yeah, it'll do, right? But I think that the way that he tweeted in Spanish, it's like saying, like, you don't get it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you are completely out of touch and you don't get it. So the 23rd district, the median age is around 35 years of age. It's 50-50, 51-49 male, female, and he's 70% Hispanic, right? He found a formula, right? And that formula that I guess some Republicans have not found yet is, yes, we have conservative issues about, traditional conservative, very traditional, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he understands the new generation.
Yeah.
Same-sex marriage, right? It's like for younger generations, that is not an issue.
Yeah.
It's whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to oppose what my constituents want.
Yeah.
It's just irrelevant.
Yeah.
Issues about control. It's common sense.
Yeah.
You can ask any, responsible gun owner, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, do you want, a
Yeah.
16-year-old to go and buy an assault rifle?
Yeah.
They say, like, no.
Yeah, whose mental health history has not been reported adequately.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's like no, absolutely 100% no, right?
You make a great point. And actually, it's funny because not only did he tweet that, I think, which was a great response, but also it marginalizes the impact of the Republican Party in this race. Now, the party can effectively raise money for somebody else and maybe back somebody else, but they won't, right? They won't because you want to win the seat. So think about this. I mean, politically speaking, the Bear portion of this district is growing. And that's really where, as you're saying, like there's a lot more of this kind of diverse politics.
Right.
That has grown about 100,000 people since 2010. And the numbers that Republicans have been winning in that district have been shrinking. So he knows he's got to hold that line. The rest of the district hasn't been growing at all. It's like losing population.
Right.
But the Republican votes is increasing. So he knows where his politics are.
Exactly.
Let him do it. The Democrats embrace Henry Cuellar, and obviously there's a lot of differences there, but he's in a position where the Democrats want to keep that seat, and he's found a formula that works to represent his district. So let him do it, right? So party purity is kind of a double-edged sword. Speaking of double-edged sword, it's interesting to say that like hypocrisy can run pretty deep in politics.
Oh, really?
I don't want to spend too much time talking about this, but obviously there's some hypocrisy going on. I don't know if I have broken news for you, but basically like sometimes politicians are not fair with how they talk about things.
I didn't know that.
The debate over drag shows in Texas has heated up this week. Last week, Representative Nate Schatzline, who was a very anti-drag, very conservative lawmaker from Fort Worth, has been revealed to have a video that showed up that has him wearing a dress and masquerading in a kind of feather mask, skipping through a park. He says for a high school theater project that it was just a lark. And other people say, well, that's what drag is. It's an expression. This is going to be a debate that we'll have and talk more about. But obviously, this is interesting because, this will get to the core of the hypocrisy about how people play these issues and whether or not this is something that is, kind of a social policy that the state should regulate. So what do you make of all of this kind of weirdness?
Well, I mean, it's like, I don't get it, no?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, why?
Yeah.
I mean, like, I don't understand what is the public policy intention of having something that has not had, significant public policy issues, right?
Yeah.
Over the past. And, well, we're going to try to regulate.
Yeah.
So that's one issue, right? The other important issue is like, okay, wait. You said that less regulation, less government. The government is not the answer, right? The problem is the government, paraphrasing President Reagan, right? So which one is it? Because you get me very confused every single time, and I just don't get it.
And the law he's proposed doesn't distinguish between a sexually explicit drag show in a theater, bar, nightclub, or commercial business. So it's definitely something that's interesting. Molly Ivins, a famous journalist from Texas, once said that Texas government and Texas politics is the finest form of free entertainment ever invented. So that's definitely true. We're going to talk all next week about the legislature at midterm. So we'll get into all of those details. But obviously, we're going to have to wrap it up for the week.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for watching us. Thanks to Houston Public Media for helping us making this show look good and sound good.
I'm Brandon Rottinghaus.
And I'm Jeronimo Cortina. See you next week.